everyone, this is Mindy for Honeybee Stamps, and in today's video I'm going to be combining a few of the lovely layers sets to create this outdoorsy nighttime scene. So I'm going to be starting off my card with the lovely layers owl, and I'm going to be showing you a few things here. Third time's the charm, right? That's how the saying goes, and that's how it went with this owl. To be honest, I've always been kind of intimidated by the owl, and not so much by the dies to layer it together, but by choosing colors. I really struggle choosing colors when it comes to layering up my images. So the first thing that I always do with my lovely layers is die cut the pieces from white cardstock. Now, I'm not going to show you everything in this first part because this is not what I ended up using, but I went through and I used various shades of brown ink to blend on some color. I was using the Honeybee Stamps website as a guide, trying to go off of the colors that they had, but I'm just not very good with picking my colors. And my one wing, I wanted it to be darker. I went too dark on my owl, so I had to bring in a dark gray. Now, as this was layering together, I kind of just placed it on top of it. I wasn't liking it. And honestly, as I'm doing the voiceover, it looks fine on screen, but for some reason, while I was in person at the time working on it, I didn't like it. So I scratched this idea, I put it off on the side, and I decided to start over. And this time I went with colored cardstock. So I went through my scraps. Once again, this is actually attempt number 2. So I went through my scraps of cardstock, found some different shades of brown. I was using my ink blended pieces as a guide, thinking, okay, this is what I did. This is what I want to change. I went ahead and layered it together. I even added a little bit of ink blending to the wing, and I glued everything down. Now, everything looks fine up until the beak. I totally lost the beak, and I was just getting crushed and frustrated at this point. It would have been fine if it wasn't for that beak. I really needed a beak in there to be a different color. So back to the drawing board. I sped this portion up because we've seen this owl a few times now. This time, I did it out of some light gray cardstock. Now, this one I did end up being really happy with. Of course, because it's the third time and this is what you're going to see in the finished project. So for whatever reason, I was just really struggling with my browns. I completely switched my color scheme, went with the grays, and I was much happier with that. So if you are struggling with anything, just kind of change gears a little bit, and that may help you. And also just walk away. Sometimes walking away also gives you a new perspective. So I really like how this owl turned out, just plain cardstock, and I didn't even do any ink blending to it. Now, I knew I wanted to use these trees, and I was kind of frustrated, so I didn't want to put a ton of effort into these trees, which led me to bringing out my Distress spray stains. So for this, I used a bundled sage, I used forest moss, and peeled paint. Now, I just sprayed on hammermill cardstock, which is only about maybe 100 pounds, so it's not very heavy and not real good for media like this. So I was being very careful how I sprayed, and then I made sure that the cardstock was really nice and dry before I did any die cutting. Now with the trees, there are a couple layers. The base layer I die cut out of the lighter shade of cardstock. The top layer I die cut out of the darker one. Once again, I'm looking at this thinking, I don't like that. I don't like the base layer being that light color. So instead of starting over, I'm just grabbing some Rustic Wilderness Distress ink and a blending brush, and I'm going to go over that base layer. So this is the layer that doesn't have any detail to it. Now I can put these on top of each other, and I liked that a lot better. So I'm going to go ahead and assemble that. I just have the tree trunks cut out of some brown cardstock. That's going to go in between your layers. So you kind of see peaks of it through the branches, which I thought was really fun. I am definitely going to be keeping these trees on the top of my pile because I think they're going to be really great for fall cards. So I'm just using my precision glue to attach everything and my tweezers to place that on top, kind of squeeze it together, make sure it's adhered together really well. So I only did two trees. I could have really filled up the background or even used the trees embossing folder, which I did have sitting off on the side. But what I decided to do instead was I wanted to have a nighttime scene. Now, typically I will ink blend because I love ink blending scenes, but I had put so much effort into that owl. I was kind of spent, but I wanted to finish the card. So I brought out the Adventure Awaits paper pack, and I really loved that nighttime sky. So instead of having that be the entire background, I'm taking a piece of white cardstock and I'm going to use one of the ovals to cut out a window. So I centered that on my cardstock, held that down with Easy C tape, and ran that through my die cut machine. Then I'm going to place some foam tape on the back side of that to pop it up for dimension. I trimmed one of those nighttime sky panels out to 4¼ by 5½. I could remove the release paper of my foam tape and attach that to the front. Now at this point, it's just a matter of assembly. And I kind of had an idea what I wanted to do, but you can see here that I do a lot of fiddling. Nothing really comes easy when it comes to figuring out the design, especially something when it has quite a few layers to it. So I use things as guides. I place them there to get an idea where I want things to be. Then I attach them down with either some foam tape and liquid glue. Now the foam tape I'm mainly placing on the side of the die cut pieces that are going to be overlapping that window, because that's going to help everything be flush across the front of the card and not give it too much more dimension so I can send this through the mail. Now you did see here I have a stump that is from the Lovely Layers Slice and Stump die set. I had die cut that off screen. I apologize I didn't show any of that, but I thought he just needed somewhere to perch. So now I'm going to bring in one of the stamp sets. I think this is a Mini Messages. Lot of really great skinny messages on here, which are some of my favorite type of sentiments. And I'm going to stamp this in intense black ink from Honeybee Stamps just down onto some white cardstock. Now there is also a die set in here that gives you a bunch of different size strips. Some are rounded, some have the sharp corners. I just found one that fit my sentiment best. And then I trimmed it down just a little bit smaller because there's not going to be a ton of room where I want to place it. I'm going to trim out some thin foam squares into a thin strip, and I'm going to add that onto the side of the sentiment that's going to be overlapping the window. And then I can just place some liquid glue on the other end. Sentiments is another place that always hangs me up or that I get hung up, because I could sit and fiddle with it for hours. So I just found a good little nook to place that and attach that to the front of the card. So there is my completed card. I made it through. I really do love how this turned out. Even with all my struggles in the beginning, I absolutely love the color of the owl, the trees, and that nighttime sky, which was so easy to bring in because it was patterned paper. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Thank you so much for joining us today.